Hey everybody, Paul Sterling here. Welcome to a super important topic. I am a relationship and intimacy coach, and normally I'm into the situation when conflict has showed up. And so what I want to do today is talk about how do we recognize what causes conflict, how can we avoid conflict, how can we melt it if it's happening or resolve it. It's such an important thing, and the way we deal with it, how we deal with conflict will decide whether or not our relationship, we end up getting closer and closer or destroy the relationship. And I'm going to quote somebody here. He said, "How we communicate when we are vulnerable, hurt, afraid, or angry will set the stage for the kind of relationship we create." That actually is Sean Folley, who is my brother. And it's interesting to quote your own brother, but he has such immense wisdom in this area and has one of the most remarkable relationships. So I have no problem quoting him. So today we are going to dive in, talk about what it is, how it impacts you. I also want to talk about the two types of conflict, what makes it better, what makes it worse, what resolves it, next steps you can take. Now, if you haven't been on one of my calls before, this is interactive. Now, the interactive side is comments. You can leave comments, you can make questions, you can write questions. I'll try to answer them. And most of your comments I will be able to see right away. Some of them I don't get right away. So the first thing I'd love to do is make a request. Would you be willing to let me know where you're dialing in from? Where in the world are you right now? That would be awesome. The second thing is what tends to create conflict for you is it conversations around money, intimacy, communication, relationships, exes, jealousy, fear, all sorts of different things that could cause conflict in your relationship. So let's look at what conflict is. What is conflict anyway? And I want to give you some examples, and I want to hear some examples from you. So there's many different types of conflict, but the two major ones I'm going to dive into today, which are conflicts around strategies. And strategies are how we get our needs met. So you might have a strategy like the best route, the fastest route home, and get in a conflict over we should have taken this route versus that route. What's the best food? Well, you can get in a conflict over whether you go to McDonald's or you go to Whole Foods. Now, McDonald's may be the best food based on fast food, low energy, and Whole Foods may be the best food based on, you have a whole different set of criteria there: health, well-being, longevity, best way to raise kids, make money, who makes the decisions. There's all these different strategies around conflicts, or strategies that can create conflicts. The other core one here is conflict of needs. If somebody has a need for space, somebody else has a need for connection. So I've worked with couples, one couple where literally they told me a story. He was needing space, she was needing connection. He went to drive away. She laid down behind the car so he couldn't leave. So there was a conflict. And he was needing space, she was needing connection. Sometimes we have a need for intimacy or sex, and the other person is needing sleep, and it can create a conflict. And not all conflicts end up in raised voice, it can be in hurt feelings, people taking things personally. Someone might have a need for variety, and that actually can lead to open relationship, polyamory, affairs, cheating, and the other person may have a need for comfort and safety, leading to monogamy. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just pointing out places where conflict can happen. The other place which most people don't think about, and this is really the most important one for happiness, is internal conflicts. When we have a conflict where we have a need for connection with others, and we also have a need to be authentic, and where we give up our authenticity to be connected, to fit in with others. So fitting in versus standing out. You might want to fit in, and you might there's why kids join a gang. They want to fit in versus standing out. And we're going to dive into that. So I'd love to see your comments. What causes the most conflict for you? And what's the impact of conflict? Do you shut down? Do you pull away? And this is an ongoing thing. I literally wrote a book about it. It has been ongoing most of my life because I grew up in a family where there was lots of conflict. And conflict to me was pretty dangerous. So I wanted to avoid conflict. It also tends to be, if you look at it based on the sexes, sometimes it's more dangerous for the feminine to get in conflict because the masculine tends to be stronger. So sometimes people give up on their needs and stop being truthful and authentic because they have a need for safety or to fit in or to belong. So we're going to dive into this. If you get this wrong, if you get conflict wrong, and there we go. What happens, it starts when somebody doesn't feel heard, understood, or valued. The harder you try, the worse it gets. This is one that's leading up to conflict. You treat each other's triggers and you end up in conflict. And conflict will erode trust and intimacy if you face it wrong, if you don't deal with it the way I'm going to talk to you about it today. And I had a conflict last night. So this is not something that like you learn about it, fix it, and then never have to deal with it again. It's an ongoing exercise. And if you get conflicts wrong, it can take days, weeks, months to recover. And the more conflict you have, or the more you try to avoid conflicts, which is going to sound ironic and paradoxical, you tend to move down the scale. In the beginning of relationships, great, there's a special spark. And what happens is if you don't know how to deal with conflicts start to erode the relationship. It goes down from great to good. And then you find yourself stuck in a rut. It's like Groundhog Day because you're not talking about the important topics because you're trying to avoid conflict. And then down here, you end up in a place where if you don't know what you're doing, you end up in a place where it's almost constant conflict. And the same issues keep getting recycled over and over again and not resolved. And when it gets bad enough, it's crisis. Should I stay or should I go? So that's what happens if you do it wrong. It's downward spiral. If you get this right, what happens is you can meet conflict with courage and compassion and curiosity, and you can move the relationship up and you stop seeing conflict as something as a disaster, but actually a chance to bring you closer. So when you get it right and meet it with courage and compassion and curiosity, both of you feel heard, understood, and valued. And there ends up being something that's critical here is it feels safe. There's safety in communication. And then you can You feel confident in repairing any misunderstandings and upsets. And that communication builds trust and intimacy, and you can have an upset and rebound in minutes. So, which one would you rather do? Take days, weeks, months, or maybe even never recover, or be able to do it in maybe minutes, maybe an hour, and at the end of that time, be closer than you ever were before. So, towards the end of this, I'm going to talk to you about 5 critical questions. 5 questions on that will help you melt almost any conflict. And right now, I'm also going to dive into how I got here and why it's so hard. Why is it so hard to resolve conflicts when you still love each other? And most relationships, by the way, don't end because of lack of love. They end because you run into a problem bigger than your skill set. There is nothing more painful than having a relationship end where you still love each other. And this is probably the reason I do what I do today. That's my dad. That's my mom. They still loved each other till the day my dad died, and we still love him now. But they got divorced after 18 years because they ran into problems that were bigger than their skill sets. And it broke their hearts, and they got a divorce. This is me and my older brother, when we got along before we ended up almost in a constant state of conflict. I think part of the reason that I have focused on this and wrote a book about it is because I grew up in a very, I consider, pretty emotionally and sometimes physically dangerous environment. My dad ended up being an alcoholic. My older brother was physically abusive. And so I had to learn about conflict early on. And this is me and my ex-wife, and I went through 1 divorce and 4 broken engagements to get where I am. And it was either master these skills or become a monk and avoid conflict altogether. So here we go. This is one of my mentors. Before I'll stop that slide for a second. Marshall Rosenberg is no longer with us. Marshall was one of the people I can look at my life before and after Marshall Rosenberg. And by the way, I just want to thank you for being on this call. This call it's a serious topic. It's not light and fluffy. I know there's tons of things you could do on Facebook that would be easier, more fun, that would satisfy you with more of the ADD, bounce from thing to thing, 30-second videos. This is an hour-long deep dive into one of, to me, after doing this for 25 years, one of the most important topics we can think about in relationships. Because it's not the good times that destroy relationships. It's that when we don't know how to deal with conflict. And why is conflict so hard to resolve? Well, what Marshall, the creator of nonviolent communication, one of my mentors, said, and here it is, and this is one of his lesser known quotes, but one that really made a huge difference for me, said the normal outcome of most communication is misunderstanding. And a lot of those misunderstandings lead to what? Conflict. So why does so much of our communication fail? And if you think about it, it's the number one tool, most important tool in relationships. And right now, I think it's a 65% divorce rate. And that doesn't include all of the people who don't get married and end up being in a relationship 10, 15 years and still get separated. Why? Because we're depending on a tool, and this tool fails most of the time. Now, I'm going to tell you why that is, at least in my mind, here in a second. The other mentor that I'm mixing this in with, and that I don't want to use, well, actually, I will use that quote later. But the other mentor is Tony Robbins. That's me when I had hair. I used to work for Tony years ago. And Tony taught me a lot about conflict and why conflict happens also, because it's based on when we're not getting these core needs met, it creates conflict. So 2 seconds about me. I did not start out to be a relationship coach. In fact, I was somewhat of a relationship disaster, not a master. You saw my parents, my dad, great guy in some areas and a horrible role model in others. I went through 1 divorce, 4 broken engagements before I finally said, I need to master this. Now, studying with Tony Robbins, Marshall Rosenberg, Byron Katie, a bunch of other people, I took what I learned and wrote a book called Argue Less, Love More. And it became an Amazon #1 in counseling, couples and family therapy, marriage, healthy relationships, and even #1 in dysfunctional relationships. And my YouTube video, Sacred Sexuality, because that's another part of what I teach, at this point, it's over, I think, about 6.4 million views. So that's something that I have focused on and really put a lot of time and energy in. And that's Marianne Williamson with me in my book. So let me ask you a question here. This is an important question. Is conflict good or bad? If you could just answer in there, is conflict good or is conflict bad? Just type that in the comments. I'd love to hear your answer. And while you're doing that, I want you to take a look at this painting and tell me, what do you see? And a lot of people, when they first look at it, they see it one way, and in a second, I'm going to show them how to look at it differently. So the first thing people might see is they might see and go, oh, there's some nudes. Well, you might see that. Or you could look closer and you could see, what is that right there? And what's that right there? And what's that and that? If you look at it, those are all fish, porpoises, I believe. And what happens is once you see the porpoises, it's hard not to see them. But in the beginning, they were invisible. What's this got to do with conflict and relationships in general? Is my job today is to help you look at conflicts differently. So at one point, you might have seen them one way. Another moment, you see them a totally different way. And yes, I'm excited to hear why conflict is good. Great. I am excited to talk about it. And let me be clear, I did not always think of it, and I still have a hard time wrestling with this one. But I will explain why conflict is important and is good. And I'm going to dive into it right here. Now, if you look at what people want, is they want to get a result. This is called the cybernetic loop here, by the way. You're on this call because you want some results to change. You either want something new in your relationship or you want something to stop. But there's some results that you want to change in your relationship. So to get a result, what do you have to take? You have to take action. So the action controls your results. Your results, all right. Well, so what controls your action? So I'd love to hear. If actions control results, what controls your action? Your beliefs. And I will dive into why this is important in conflict too right away. But if your belief is that conflict is what? Bad, what kind of action are you going to take? Avoid conflict. Now, how many of you on this call, and I want to be, how many of you on this call think that the truth is important? Being authentic is important. Being vulnerable is important. If those things are important to you, let me know. Because the thing is, if authenticity and honesty and openness and vulnerability are all important to you, there's a 99% chance you're going to run into conflict. And if you think conflict is bad, then what happens is you end up avoiding the telling the truth or talking about tough issues that need to be talked about. Now, if you think that, and I'll give you some reasons why conflict may be good, and it depends on how we deal with it, then you're going to, that belief's going to cause different actions, going to produce different results. So if you think conflict is bad, what's it going to do? If you spend all your time in your relationship avoiding conflict, so avoiding talking about tough issues, avoiding telling the truth, avoiding talking about, say, money or sex, or your needs aren't getting met, what kind of results is it going to impact your relationship with long term? So let's take and look at it a little bit differently. I'm going to add one thing here because this is a loop. This is why the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. So if the poor are brought up in a poor household, they end up with poor beliefs and take poor action and get poor results. And this is not good or bad. This just tends to be what happens. Somebody brought up in a rich household, they end up with rich beliefs, they take rich action. And this isn't true all the time. This is generally. Now, what is the deciding factor here? It's this outside factor called your vision. So what's creating your beliefs is either your vision of possibility or your past. So if your vision is conflict is good because I know how to turn it into fertilizer for something great, then that's going to impact your beliefs. You're going to take action differently. You're going to deal with things differently. So let's test this. I'll just be super brief on this one because conflict is a form of communication. We're communicating, and all communication is an act of love or a cry for help. A lot of times what happens is when people are upset and it starts to be a conflict, underneath it is a what? Is a cry for help. And if you start to see conflicts as a cry for help, that's going to shift you. That is an empowering belief. If you think conflicts are bad, you're going to avoid them. If you think it's a cry for help, you're going to lean in. And what happens when we avoid conflicts? Well, the other day I was riding home from my mountain bike trip, and these are not my photos, but I passed a car and his tire looked exactly like this. He had waited too late to deal with it, and he passed what I call the point of no return. Now, in relationships, there is a point of no return. If you ignore the early warnings, if you don't take action, there gets to be a point where it's the point of no return. If you avoid conflicts, if you avoid little conflicts, what happens is they become big conflicts. I talked to one guy who avoided conflicts. He came to my office. He'd been married for 25 years. His wife wanted to do some coaching and therapy and counseling years ago, and he ignored it. He avoided it because he wanted to avoid conflict. He wanted to avoid the upset. He came home and his house was cleaned out. She had got a moving company. They came in and basically cleaned out the house while he was at work. There was hardly anything left. I think there might have been a kitchen table and a tiny bit of furniture. Why? Because he avoided conflict until it became too late. If you catch it early, and I'll show you what to do, you can find the treasures in the triggers, the gems in the conflict. And what I talk about is there's a huge difference between an acorn and an oak tree. And what I read a book once, or no, I read the title to the book. Sorry, I have not read the book, so I'm guilty of judging a book by its cover. And it said, and I heard a bunch about it, but don't sweat the small stuff. I I say wrong, wrong, wrong. Sweat the small stuff. It's easier to deal with acorns than an oak tree. If that acorn had fallen on that roof, it would have bounced off, no problem. But when you wait until it's a full grown oak tree, it split the roof in half. What does that mean? There are people where they don't deal with the acorn, it becomes an oak tree. It becomes an affair. It becomes a betrayal. It becomes broken agreements. It becomes divorce. It becomes separation. It becomes a non-existent sex life. It becomes upsets and arguments over things that have nothing to do with the relationship at all. So what we want to do is catch them while they're acorns and lean into them. And if you can meet conflict with courage, compassion, and curiosity, courage, compassion, curiosity, rather than defensiveness or attacking back or making a person feel bad, stupid, and wrong. What we're trying to do is tame it when it's small enough. So taming your triggers, this is another way of saying conflicts. But as emotions go up, what happens to your intelligence? It goes down. So what I want to do is look at what are the triggers that create conflict. So in your life, what are some of the conflict triggers? What creates triggers? Now, I'm giving you specific situations, but it also can be a tone of voice, the way he looked at you, the way he said it, something they did or didn't do, the story you made up about it. There's a bunch of different things that can create conflict, that can trigger the conflict. It could be a lack of romance, needs not being met, feelings being neglected, lack of intimacy, financial issues, a lot of conflicts around that. Affairs, broken agreements, jealousy, communication, lost trust. So what are some of the things that trigger conflict for you? It could be past wounds. And their current behavior looks like a lover in the past that had wounded you multiple times or done deep wound. How decisions are made can create conflict. How we deal with in-laws and the exes, politics, career, all of these things can create conflicts. And underneath almost all of the conflicts are when your needs stop getting met. So what I'm talking about here is, how do you create a breakthrough in the way you look at conflicts so that you stop avoiding them and lean into them and catch them when they're acorns? Because what I do, I am a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an expert in the area of creating breakthroughs that transform relationships. There's one of my favorite quotes is a Kennedy quote that says, "By the time decisions get to my desk, all the easy ones have been made." Normally, by the time couples come to work with me, they've tried all the easy stuff. They've gone to workshops, they've read books, they've seen the therapist, they might have tried counseling, they've tried a ton of stuff. They may have tried for years. And then somebody tells them about my work and end up showing up and wanting a breakthrough. And what a breakthrough is when something becomes possible that wasn't possible before. It can be a breakthrough in your beliefs. It can be a breakthrough in your behavior. If you look at it like right here, I'm sure every one of you has one of these cell phone. That's a huge breakthrough in the last, I don't know what, 30 years or 40 years, huge breakthroughs in technology. And somebody, the Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, the thinkers that lead the way, I might not love Amazon, but boy, that was a huge breakthrough in the way packages are done. And there's been a transformation. So, what I want to do is create a breakthrough in the way you look at conflicts in your relationship so that you can get more of your needs met. And this right here, there's only, according to me, according to Tony Robbins, according to a couple other people, only one reason to even be in a relationship is to what? Get your needs met. Almost every conflict in relationship is when your needs or expectations aren't getting met. And luckily, there's 10 core needs. Now, there are a lot more needs. Like when I studied with Marshall Rosenberg, the creator of nonviolent communication, he had a list. It was probably over 100 different needs. Tony has 6 core needs. When I work with couples, have 10, and I help them notice, name, and negotiate their needs. And that actually helps people avoid conflict. If you're upset and you're in the middle of a conflict, one of the number one ways to get the most out of conflict is to try to figure out what underlying need is not getting met. The bigger the upset, the more important the need is. This is critical. Bigger upset, more important the need is. So this is not a call solely about needs. I could take the whole talk up just going to needs, but the need for certainty and trust, the need for uncertainty and variety, the need to feel significant, feel like a priority, love and connection, growth, contribution, emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, sexual intimacy. And you notice those 3 are separated because a lot of times they get collapsed. When people hear the word intimacy, they just think of sex. No, actually, emotional intimacy is critical. Physical intimacy, holding, cuddling, and sexual intimacy, and the need for attraction. If you've in a relationship where all 10 of those needs are getting met at a level of, say, 5 or above, you're in a remarkable relationship. If your top being met at like 8s or 9s, you're in the love of your life. And I can help couples transform their relationship by understanding what are your top 3 needs. If you understand your partner's top 3 needs and consciously are trying to help meet them, you're going to reduce the amount of conflict. Now, earlier on, I was asked, why is conflict good? Well, conflict is letting you know, like, here's a different way of looking at it. I was driving from Napa Valley to Carmel Valley. I'm in Carmel right now. And the oil light went on. What did the oil light tell me? There is a problem. There is a need that isn't getting met. So if the oil light didn't come on and the engine ran out of oil, it would have blown up my engine. So conflict is a place, it's like the warning light on your engine telling you that somewhere there's a need for either you or your partner is not getting met. If it's an internal conflict, there's a need inside of you that's not getting met. This is especially important for a lot of women that I've been dealing with that are in their late 40s, 50s, 60s, where they've spent a large part of their lives trying to meet everybody else's needs. And they were told someday it will be your turn. And they're like going, wait a second, I'm looking at my watch. When is it my turn? And there's some conflict there. So conflict is a warning light to tell you that some precious need of yours is not getting met. And if you understand this, this is the language of relationship, is the language of needs. And it's so important to understand that language if you want to have a breakthrough. And part of what I do when I work with couples is help them identify what are their limiting beliefs and what are their needs. If you understand your partner's precious needs, there's you can make them happy. So why is it so hard to get it? And by the way, I would love it. I love the comments I'm getting. And if somewhere you're having aha, like there's a breakthrough and you go, wow, I would love to hear what that breakthrough is. Just type that in the comments below. So why is it so hard to get it right? To resolve conflicts, you'd think it would be somewhat easy. Well, I'm going to give you a couple of things about how the brain works right now, and you're going to go, oh my God, no wonder it's a surprise we ever get anything right. There's 3 levels that the brain works at: alert, alarm, attack. And this is my modification of work I read from a guy named Stan Tatkin, Wired for Love. Brilliant, brilliant man. So what happens when we're like lying in bed or well, I'll start with the lying in bed. You're starting to doze off and you hear a clunk and your brain goes, alert, pay attention. So this is when you start to like pay attention. And then you might hear footsteps and your brain goes to alarm, and it's basically going, is there danger? So at this point, it's like looking for danger. Is there danger? If there isn't, if there's no danger, then you can go right back to alert and then back, well, in this case, back to sleep. If there is danger, if your brain says yes, well, what typically takes over is your reptile brain. And your reptile brain is not designed to make your relationship work. It's designed to do very few things, mostly keep you what? Safe. And to do that, it needs to know, are you the enemy or ally? And what keeps you, where is there safety and where is there danger? And it's not very good at subtleties or communication. It's only worried about safety and danger, enemy or ally. And what's really important is to know how to talk to this brain. And I'm about to give you some tips on how to talk to somebody when they're in their reptile brain. Do not try to use logic. Don't even try to use love. There are a lot of things that will not work that will just escalate it. Now, that's one of the reasons communication falls apart, is because it's hard to talk to a dinosaur or a reptile. They don't understand a lot of the subtleties of language. And one of the things you can do to calm down a reptile, and this is one of the 5 questions, this is a writer downer. When you're triggered, actually when your partner's triggered or anybody's triggered, and we have somebody on the call that used this on an airlines with someone who was really upset in first class, and they were yelling and they were definitely in their dinosaur brain. And he went back to this woman and he didn't say, honey, he just said, excuse me, what do you need to feel safe right now? And that's all it took. It calmed her down. And she said, I just need to feel secure. And he walked her all the way out to customs and stayed with her. Now, he could have done the other thing. He could have said, listen, if you don't sit down and be quiet, we're going to call TSA. You're going to be arrested and taken off the plane. What would that have done? That would have escalated the conflict. What did she need? She was crying. What was she crying for? Crying for help. And what did she want? She wanted to feel safe. If you want to transform your relationship, what you do is create safe spaces to communicate in, to be able to be vulnerable. See, because when dinosaur mind, vulnerability is not an option. Vulnerability doesn't feel safe. You've got to get people back into their heart. And I'm going to move this presentation down. I want to show you one other thing here. Here it is. And I'd love to hear, are you getting something from this? Is this making sense? If it is, what are you getting from this? Now, what I talked about was the dinosaur brain. There are three different languages that we're speaking, three different languages that we're using when we're in communication. We're communicating from the head, and that's the language of reason and logic. We communicate from the heart, which is a very different language. It's a language of feelings and needs. It's all about love. And when you're in your reptile brain, it's all about reactions. It's about loss, protection, safety. Who is the enemy? Where is the danger? Who is the ally? How can I protect myself? And this is when somebody's in conflict, they're typically here. And what we want to do is get them up here so you can actually talk to them, or get them up here. But if you try to use logic on them, you become more and more of the enemy. If you end up trying to help them find safety, you become the ally. This is critical. And if you don't know about this, you're learning now. And it takes some practice to start applying it. So when we're communicating, we're either communicating from our head, our heart, or our hurt. And you could be listening from or speaking from. If you're listening from your head, you're listening for logic, facts, figures, who's right, who's wrong. If you're listening from your heart, you're trying to figure out, how does somebody feel right now? Forget the facts, and vulnerability is key here. So that's a critical part of this. That's the first sentence that I wanted to go through is, what do you need to feel safe right now? And we're going to come back to those other sentences in a second. But I want to ask you, when conflict shows up, this is a question for you in particular. I'm looking at you right there. Hey, you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for giving yourself this time to look at this really critical topic. And I want to ask you to answer honestly here. Which way do you go when you're in the middle of conflict? And here are three different options. Number one, do you collapse? And down here, by the way, I call this the drama line. And by the way, I was told by one of the people who watches my show on a regular basis, I should learn how to spell better. I am 67 years old. I think I'm pretty stuck on how I spell, and it's creative spelling. But down here on the drama line, where we're reactive, the two sides of reactive is we either collapse or we get combative. Now, here's what happened growing up in my family. My older brother used to beat me up on a semi-regular basis until I collapsed. And that's a picture of a dog rolling over, just like I give up, to stop the fight. A lot of us have learned that to avoid being hurt, we collapse rather than deal with the conflict another way. That's, I lose, you win, I give up. So some of you might have that. There are other times where I get combative. But see, in my household, it wasn't possible. My dad was the ultimate combative. My older brother was the next combative. They had to win. So someone had to lose. So in conflict, this is where conflicts escalate. If you have a combative and a collapser, and collapsing tends to be a more feminine trait, not always. And I want to say this carefully, because it's not a good or bad thing. It's what we learn as a kid that we need to do to survive. It's a survival trait. So I learned early on that if I didn't collapse, I got beaten more. And I went and I've spent I went and became a commercial fisherman in Alaska and spent 18 years doing that so I could build my combative skills. And now where I want to be is spend more time in being courageous to meet conflict with courage, compassion, and curiosity. And so curiosity, some magic words in curiosity is tell me more. I want to enter your world. I want to understand you. Yes, and somebody said I've tried both of them recently, and neither work, collapse or combative. And you look at right now in politics, there's a lot of that that's happening in the world of politics. There's people who are proud of how combative they are, and other people that are collapsing, and neither of them are creating what we want as far as solutions go on the planet. So the idea here is to look at which one do you do and which one do you want to do. Now, this one for me takes conscious effort. If I'm not consciously working for this, my default is either to collapse or to get combative, depending upon the relationship and who I'm with. And I am 6'3", 230 pounds. I shouldn't collapse. And I do, because it's part of that reactive trauma drama line where I'm not feeling resourceful. When I feel resourceful, I'm up here at being courageous, compassionate, and curious. Hopefully this is making sense to you. Now, the other thing that I was going to go to up here is another reason that, going all the way back to the top, when I said Marshall Rosenberg's quote, the normal outcome of most communication is misunderstanding. And I think some of you have heard the study, and now people are saying the study's not as true as it was. But anyway, the study talked about the 3 parts of communication, 3 parts. Number 1, physiology. So I'm going to do a quick example with you. So I can see you out there. Watch my hand and do what I'm asking you to do. So hold your hand like this. Now close your fingers like this. Now open your fingers like this. Now close your fingers like that. Now put your hand on your chin. Now hold it right there. Now look at yourself. Where is your hand? Is it on your cheek or is it on your chin? Now see, when I do this live and in person, 95% of the people put it on their cheek. Why? Because my body language showed cheek. My words said chin. So your physiology, your body language, if you look at this, like this guy could be saying, I'm sorry, but his body language is saying, go to hell. So when your body language is saying one thing and your words are saying another thing, which one wins, body language or words? Typically, body language, because we're dealing with old fears. Now, the second part of it is tonality. If the words are, I'm sorry, and the tonality is, I'm sorry, then which one wins out? Tonality or the words? I said, I'm sorry. I don't know why you're still grumbling. I said, I'm sorry. So tonality beats out words. The last thing is words. I'm sorry. So if you want to be congruent, you need to have the physiology, the tonality, and the words all say the same thing. Now, the study was something like 55% of the impact comes from your physiology, 38%, from your tonality, and 7% from your words. I don't care whether that's entirely accurate or not. It doesn't matter. What matters is that if all 3 of these aren't saying the same thing, there's a huge chance that you're going to be misunderstood. So this is part of the reason that communication gets misunderstood all the time, because we're communicating either from our head, our heart, or our hurt. Our physiology isn't matching our tonality, isn't matching our words. You know, it's like, this is why in relationships, when And it typically tends to be a feminine trait, but men do it too. When your partner goes, "How are you?" and the word is, say it with me, I am what? Fine. How are you? I'm just fine. Now, what's the word say? Fine. And you go, "Oh no, they're not fine. It's danger." Because what's the tone saying? The tone is saying not fine at all. And the physiology might be saying not fine. You might have your arms crossed going, "I'm fine." And what are you communicating? Basically, don't screw with me, but I'm not going to talk about it. So why is it, whoops, I got a couple extra slides in here. Why is it so important to solve this? Because if you don't solve it, your relationship, you won't be able to talk about the tough issues, and you won't be able to translate conflict into the underlying beautiful needs that are not being met, and use conflict to bring you closer rather than drive you apart. Because I love this quote from Einstein: we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them, and we can't resolve conflicts using the same kind of communication we used when we started the conflict. So we're learning a different way of dealing with conflict, and the 5 sentences. So if you just took a picture of this page, posted it up on your refrigerator, talk to your partner about it, and practice this like on a regular basis, it would transform the way you deal with conflict, and you would be able to lean into it because you would understand underneath the conflict is a huge cry for help, and there's a precious need that's not being met. And at that point, they might not know what the what the precious need is. But maybe if you could ask them some questions. So, one of the core questions after they feel safe. So, what do you need to feel safe right now? That's like the number one question. Number two, if you could have it all your way, what would be going on right now? If you could have it all your way, and this is what my beloved used on me when we were in the middle of a conflict and I was triggered and I was in my reptile brain, I was shut down. And she'd go, "Honey, if you could have it all your way, what would be different?" And I got to find, like in that moment, I got to find my precious needs that I was afraid weren't going to get met. And another one, if somebody said something that might have hurt your feelings or triggered you, got you in conflict, what would you have wanted to hear instead? And we had an upset months ago, and I thought I was being her hero, and I had done this hard work and driven this long distance, and instead of hearing the approval and appreciate it, I heard a complaint. And so later I was able to go, here's what I would have wanted to hear instead. It was able to connect us and able to connect us again to the precious needs. And what would you have wanted me to do? So this is a to do. This is basically a to say. And the last one is, what precious need of yours didn't get met that sparked this conflict? Was it the need for significance or priority? A lot of times, I just did a talk the other day, I think last Thursday, about love, relationships, and expectations. And we have these expectations, and it's to get a precious need met. And when it didn't get met, when that expectation wasn't met, when that need wasn't met, what precious need of it wasn't met? The need for feeling significant, the need for trust, the need for love and connection or intimacy. This right here, if you can take a copy of this and put it on the fridge, it will do magic for you. So I had a lot else that I wanted to cover, but We're going to do that next week. So now, at the end of each week, I do this. I say it's decision time, because my whole job is to help people transform their relationships, not just get more information. So today you've gotten some information. Unless you implement it, it's not helpful. It's only when you implement it that you get transformation. And there are three possible options here, and there are probably more, but one is to do nothing, to ignore and hope whatever is going on goes away. And that's sort of a form of self-sabotage. I'm going to just maybe avoid conflicts and not do anything and not treat them differently, not see them differently. Or here's what I did for years, and it cost me one divorce and I don't know how many, well, 4 broken engagements. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to figure it out myself. That's John Wayne there. And the third one is what Tony Robbins talks about. How to turn decades into days is you find a mentor and you learn a method. And if you're interested in learning a method, if you're interested in mentorship, get yourself going and let's talk about it. Because if it's important enough, you'll find a way. If it's not important, you'll find an excuse. So if you want a breakthrough, let me talk about that one first. If you want a breakthrough, I will spend about 15 to 30 minutes with you. I work mostly with couples. I also work with singles who want to get relationship ready, or I work with one half of a couple that's wanting a breakthrough in the relationship. But if you want a breakthrough and to transform the way you look at conflict and needs and communication, just put in the comments, breakthrough, please, and I will get you the information. We'll see whether or not it's a fit to work together. And I work with people in the areas to create breakthroughs in the area of jealousy and broken agreements. And if they've had an affair, if there've been upsets, if they're on the edge of divorce, all of those things. So one area is breakthrough, please. And if you just want to contact me, you can get a hold of me on Facebook and send me a private message. Or you can go to my website, which is Argue Less, same as the book, arguelesslovemore.net. If you're not ready for a breakthrough, but you want to stay learning, you can put in Love Link if you're not already a member of the Courageous Love Show. That is a Facebook group where all of these are posted. There's 130 hours of videos put up in the Courageous Love Show archives, that Facebook group. So if you'd like to join the Facebook group, just put in Love Link, please, in the comments. That would be awesome. I will get you that info. All right. I'm going to close on one bold request. Part of the reason I do this, one of the major reasons I do this, is to contribute, to pay it forward. And it's so helpful to me. It nourishes my soul when I hear what you got from tonight, from the courses that I do, because each one of these takes hours and hours of preparation. And I want to know that I'm making a difference. I want to know that, something I said triggered something for you, triggered in a good way. So if you could leave a comment in here, I would greatly appreciate it, what you got from tonight. The last thing is, if you got something from tonight and you think someone else can get something from tonight, there is going to be a replay, and you can, in the comments, you can put their name, tag them, tell them that they should watch this replay. All right. Thank you very much. Paul Sterling. I am signing off from Carmel, California right now, and I will see you next Thursday at 6:05. Have a great week.